When it comes to early warning, I would say that we have a number of mechanisms that are working quite well, although the problem is that always to have this capacity internalized within the country. Because at the end of the day, the interventions will be more successful if they are done by the government itself. This, I think, is a principle that does not change. The government can have support from outside. We can support the government, but we will not build sustainable systems if the systems are not internalized, are not really adopted by the countries, and the countries can run the system themselves. What we have noticed that when we have very good human resources, capacities in the countries, but there is a competition in terms of the capacities for the government, because very often government officials are overwhelmed with many tasks, and sometimes they don't have enough resources to continue to adopt and to internalize the system themselves. I think that is an area where there is need to support the government, to support officials in the government, to really run the system themselves. When we discuss these issues, sometimes people will say it's about the government to pay themselves for those services. Yeah, it's a fair point indeed, but at the same time, we see also support coming from donors or other financial partners, supporting international organizations to do the same work that the governments are supposed to do. I think this is something that we should address to support the capacity of the government instead of continuing to do the work that the governments are doing. So within African risk capacity, what we do is what I have shown. Most of the work in terms of customizing the model is done by what we call the technical working groups within the country, which is made up by experts who are within the country. So which means that actually we are supporting them in setting up the mechanism. Then for the monitoring, they do it themselves using our systems. That's true, but it's also their system, because at the end of the day, when we do calibration and they have make access, they do give access to them, to the models, it becomes their system. But I think we can do better. We can do better to have them really owning the systems themselves. Dr. Farouk El-Abbas mentioned the issue of having African-owned satellites to continue to observe what's happening on the continent. I think this is a very important point, because for now, many countries around the world, I think it's not only in African countries, relies on data collected by satellites managed by big, say, special space agencies like NASA or the European Space Agency. So there are still, those data is available for free, but sometimes they are not tailored to the needs of the countries. Also, no one knows what will happen in the future if there will be no need actually to have its own satellites. Because when you look at the communication issue in the telecommunication domain, sometimes it's important to have your own satellites. So it can be also useful to have African-owned capacities for that. When it comes to satellites with higher spatial resolution, which are more precise in terms of observing the Earth, then things change completely, because in that case, data becomes, they are not anymore freely available. You have to pay for the data. And that is can be a big challenge when you want to have more precise information for early warning, because you have then to pay for this data, and it can be very expensive. So now we can be talking about investing in the capacity to have own satellites. And someone can say, how are you going to put money building satellites when people are dying of famine in Somalia or South Sudan? That is always a big challenge. I'm saying this because myself, I have been working on different areas of remote sensing, including monitoring drought for food security, or assessing food insecurity in countries. When you do food security assessment in the field, sometimes you wonder, what I'm going to do with the satellite image. But when you are at the making decision level, when you have to decide on a resource allocation, you realize actually that you need that information. And that information will actually support people, will help people, that actually it's worth investing in those resources to be able to support and save those people who are actually suffering. It's not a luxury. I think it's something that actually African countries can think about. If they put together resources, I think it can be done. There will have been attempts, if Nigeria having their own satellites. I think some other countries have followed with some satellites, but very often there was a challenge with the like what we call the ground segment. The ground segment are actually the part of processing data coming from the satellite and then make it available to the users, like you see on Google Earth or on Google Maps. To make this data available, that is this ground segment which is missing. Sometimes we have a satellite flying there, sending data, but the ground segments sometimes are weaker. The other thing is in terms of when we're talking about natural disasters related to climate, is in terms of we've getting information about those weather events, being rainfall, forecast of tropical cyclones, forecast of flooding. Those are areas that need, I think, strong expertise and capacities that are, shall say, scarce on the continent. And the resources available on the continent are put into, Africa is in competition with other bigger organizations, say other employers who sometimes actually will provide better conditions than African employers. Then you see this flight of brains about these areas. And how to do that? I think it's to invest in education. I think the third level education, university education. I think it's very important to invest in that area so that the student at the university will start to invest in those areas also can do a difference.